So this lecture is going to work a little bit different than previous ones because what I want to do is I want to have you watch a lecture I did a year or two ago on critiques of capitalism. Because really what this section is about boom and bust cycles. And as I talked about last class, some of the heterodox economists out of mainstream economists talked about how capitalism does have these imperfections, these booms and busts from Minsky, and then also Joseph Schumpeter, the person who came up with the concept and enunciated of creative destruction, also believed that capitalism was going to create its own conditions for its own demise. So I want to give a nod to the Marxist critique of capitalism, because just like with ourselves, if we never critique ourselves, we never grow. And so while I remain a capitalist, I wish socialism would work better. And I believe that some expansion of socialism in our country would be well worth our while along the lines of Europe. And I talk about that later in the next lecture. What you're going to see is me here now discussing boom and bust cycles. And then we're going to go to a lecture where I talk about Marxism and Marxist critiques. And I want you to take notes on that. But remember this, we talked about a previous boom and bust cycle historically with tulip bulbs, right? This incredible run up in prices. And as we talked about last class, these run up in prices tend to be driven by euphoria, by mania, meaning a little crazy, a little outside the norm, a little too much excitement that then is bred by lots of credit, people willing to lend you money to buy these goods. But then at some point, people buy on credit the highest value, and the value of the asset goes down. And then you have your Minsky moment, where you have people who borrowed money and bought it at this price up high, then it's worth this amount, then you owe more money than your asset is worth. And so you start selling and you see this steep drop off in an asset price. And this is not just something that took place in the 1600s or 1500s in Holland. This is something that finance people who work in the finance industry know, and they know that there is something around an investment that is more emotional than it is analytical or mathematic or driven by pure economic analysis. And if we look at this from a website that diagrams feelings of an increase in value of an asset, just notice the words they're going to use here. Enthusiasm, right? An emotion rather than using mathematically based analytical tools to determine whether an investment is a good investment. And then we move to greed, and then delusion that something is going to stay so high in value when it is far off the trend, right? You want to look at times at the trend of the value of that good or asset, but then notice it going far off that trend driven by enthusiasm, greed, delusion, mania. Then you start believing there's a new paradigm, meaning there's a new truth. All the previous rules have been thrown out. And then we lead to our other emotions on the negative side of denial, fear, capitulation, and despair. And so this used to be heterodox, for meaning outside the mainstream, but now mainstream economists have come to finally accept this idea that really emotions and irrationality drive our decisions at times. And so I would just want to show you in light of that, here is the stock exchange values for, I believe, this is the Dow. Yeah, this is 30 large industrial companies in the United States and their average value over time. Notice from 1975 in the beginning through 95, 96, it's growing at a relatively steady rate. And then we have these booms and busts. And what I want to point out here is that here, when the Dow was at, if we look at that point, 1200, here are two best-selling books coming out saying Dow 40,000 or Dow 36,000, meaning they're expecting the Dow Jones Industrial Average to triple in size or more than triple in size. So this is that new paradigm, right? They believe something has changed, things won't go as they've gone in the past, and this asset is going to take off and change all of our lives. And note, it did not. Both of these books were published right here at this peak. Then we see another book, Why It's Different This Time, saying at this point, when this book was published here, that the Dow was going to go up to 30,000. Well, notice what it did. It did the exact opposite. So really smart people still fool themselves at times because they believe some asset is going to be able to bring them such riches, it can change their life. And so we kind of hide ourselves from the truth, and we're living on this delusion that some kind of asset can increase in value forever. And this way of being is not an American way of being. It is a human way of being. So note we saw the Dutch tulip mania. We just saw stock market mania in the 90s and 2000s. Now look at Japan. Here is their huge asset market bubble that coincided both on the top in the market for land. Look at the home prices increase in value and then collapse. Look at it about the same time, the increase in their stock market and then the collapse. And they have literally, for the last over 30 years, been dealing with the negative repercussions of this crash in their housing market and in their stock market. And so, as the chapter talks about all of these asset market bubbles and panics, while yes, some people lose some wealth, it trickles over into the broader economy, and in this case, trickles into the economy and lasts decades. So not only are the investors hurt, but the average person in an economy can be hurt. And the classic example right now of asset market bubbles is Bitcoin. I mean, look at its incredible increase in value early on and then collapse, and then another increase in value and collapse, and now another huge historic increase in value of Bitcoin and another collapse. People are betting that some asset can change their lives, and oftentimes if they're putting too much money in it, and especially if they're borrowing money to put into buying that asset, when that availability of credit dries up, we see these assets decrease in value. Now, the home market is a key a worry of mine as I'm in the home buying phase of my life, looking to buy a new home. And I'm wondering, are homes now overvalued? And so if we look historically here, we see from 1983 through 2001, 2002, it was undulating a little bit, but on a consistent path over time, increasing until around 2002. Notice that a complete change in the value of a home, this run up in home prices that had no real basis in the value of owning a home, but it changed because of the availability of credit. And so I want to briefly review that here. And notice here, home prices have gone back and even further increased into this area where I'm worried about buying a home now, that they might be overvalued again and we might have another crash like this. So notice during this time, if we look even further back in time, here are home prices over time. If somebody tells you home prices always go up, they haven't looked at history. At times, home prices collapse. Over the long run, they tend to increase, but over short periods of time, they can decrease. And what drives home prices? Well, building costs are going to drive home prices. So if you have this green line of building costs increase over this time frame, you should see home prices increase along the same way. As we have more people, more demand for houses, we should see home prices increase. When interest rates are lower, it means it's cheaper to borrow money, and then that would create home prices going up. But notice here, in this run up of that bubble in housing market prices, we don't see housing costs accelerating during this time. We see them actually decelerating. We don't see population growing at this exponential rate here, and we don't see interest rates changing incredibly dramatically when you relate it to the past. So there was something odd going on here. And what was going on is that we changed how we provided credit to borrowers. And so it used to be in traditional banking, you take your money, you put it into a bank. We've talked about this before. The bank has to keep a legal reserve of money, and then they loan the rest out. So your money becomes loaned money to somebody else, and banks are in the business of creating new money and charging interest on that. And then if you loan to a borrower, then you get payments back from the borrower. And this is why we have credit scores. Credit means, or its root is, I think in Latin, belief. That the banks have to believe that the borrowers are a good risk. That if I lend you money, I have enough information about you and I care enough about that information that I'm only going to loan to people I know are going to pay me back. But this changed when I was an economist with the Department of Labor and studying economics in grad school. We had this thing called financial modernization, it was called. And so again, depositors take their money, put it into a bank. The bank keeps some money as legal reserves, and they loan the rest out to borrowers. And in the case of the housing market, a home loan is what you call a mortgage. Be sure at least you write that in your notes that a mortgage is a loan for a home. But what banks would do is they would make many, many different loans to many, many different borrowers and then package those loans together. They were called MBS, stands for mortgage-backed securities. So they're an investment. If I make a whole bunch of loans to people, and I package up all the obligations those people have to pay me and sell those obligations to somebody else, then that somebody else is going to get that income stream of everyone paying off their mortgage at interest. So banks were finding a way to make a whole lot of home loans. And note in the past, they would care whether those people are going to pay them back. Well, if I can take all their home loans and sell them to somebody else, then I don't have the risk anymore. I've offloaded that risk on somebody else. Now, what was happening at the time, due to the reality that starting after the Great Depression, we had inherently racist mortgage policies where the government would actually subsidize white people to buy homes, but not anybody of color. And this happened officially after the Great Depression for many years, and then unofficially by banks all the way into the 1990s. So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, there was a push. Okay, listen, we need to find a way to get more home loans to people who've been historically discriminated against. So it's good intention. And some of these loans were really odd. There was a ninja loan. Ninja stands for no income, no job, no assets. Now imagine a bank giving a loan to somebody who has no job, no income, no assets, right? That wouldn't mean they have credo or belief in them paying it back. But no, what they're doing with these loans is making them and then selling them to somebody else. Liar's loans, or they were called stated income loans. You could state any income you wanted and they wouldn't check on it. So I could say I make $2 million a year. They would qualify me for a mortgage, a home loan based on that income. And so what they were trying to do is open up home loans to everyone, no matter your income, your assets, your job status, to get more people into home ownership. And if you're going to do this, you're going to get a whole lot of demand for houses, and that's what increasing that value of housing. Now, then there were ratings agencies, Fitch, Standard and Poor, Moody's, are these important agencies that rate whether or not these loans are credit worthy. And the way they rate them is like a grade: triple A, double A, single A, triple B, double B, single B, are like A, B, C, D, E, sorry, A, B, C, D, F, like a grade for a class. And they were grading whether or not these loans, these packages of loans, were something that an investor could trust. These people are going to pay them back. And because the banks paid the ratings agencies up to $100,000 for each package of loans to rate them, the ratings agencies saw this as an easy way to make money. Oh, if we just say this package of loans is great, we'll get $100,000. Let's just push them through. And so, unfortunately, ratings agencies were corrupted by the money coming in to rate all these packages of weird loans to people without jobs as perfect. Then the bank sold those loans. Like, as I was saying, they take them off their own balance sheet, so they're not exposed to that risk anymore. And they sold it to investors, like big institutional investors, actually to school districts who have some money they needed to invest. And they were sold, oh, this package of weird loans is really A-OK. Okay, we'll buy that as an investment. And then retail, like people like me, just regular people would buy those packages of loans because it looked like a good investment. And then what would the bank get? It would get money to then continue this cycle. We get more money. Well, let's loan that money out to more borrowers. Then let's package those loans off, take them off our books, sell them to somebody else, get more money and make more loans. So notice this is a virtuous cycle. This is going to keep that asset increasing in value over time. And that asset was home loans because you're just churning out loan after loan and you don't care about the credit status of your borrowers because you're taking those loans and selling them to somebody else. So what was the problem here? Well, there were a number of problems here. First of all, these loans just weren't realistic. Yeah, they were well intentioned to get people eligible for loans who had been discriminated in the past, but among all people, whether they've been discriminated in the past or not, if you don't have a job or income or assets and you're not stating your real income, you're going to qualify for loans that might not be something you can pay off over time. Furthermore, mortgage brokers, the people you work with to get a good mortgage, would get $5,000 at this time frame for every mortgage they made, for every loan they got a borrower to sign. And so they would often lie on the application without the mortgage applicant knowing because they get $5,000 and they didn't care whether it was paid back. They got $5,000 just to write that loan. The borrowers, when I gave this lecture back right after this calamity in the housing market, I had a lot of people angry at me when I said this because they'd been pushed into these home loans because somebody got $5,000 for it. Well, when you sign on the line that is dotted for a mortgage, you're supposed to read everything that's there and make sure it's true. And so if you sign a loan that you know you can't pay, then you deserve some fault as well, in my view. The banks knew at some level that this wasn't tenable, that this couldn't go on forever. And there's a great movie called The Big Short that's on HBO, I believe, HBO Max, about the banks knowing that there was a problem going on. But banks have consistently been bailed out whenever they cause problems in our economy because banks create new money, and new money is the lifeblood of a growing economy. Also, these ratings agencies, they were all found guilty of fraud for guaranteeing and saying that these loan packages were creditworthy to the buyers. And they had to pay billions in fines. I remember one particular institution had to pay $3.5 billion in fines, but that's after the market already collapsed. So note it went up, driven by all those crazy home loans. And then notice this Minsky moment, this enormous collapse in housing values. And where do most Americans hold their wealth? In their housing. And if they lose their house and they lose their wealth, that's going to cause a recession. And this caused, at this point in time, what we call the Great Recession, meaning it wasn't quite a depression, but it was close. And we just learned what to do to make sure it wasn't a depression that saved us from complete collapse. And so the theme here is that capitalism is very, very unpredictable and volatile and prone to boom and bust cycles. And so let's now, I'm going to connect you next to my lecture I gave to a class a while ago about Marxist critiques of capitalism that relate to this boom and bust cycle.
But I think I have to do, I really believe that's a good
Here's from McCloskey, individual dignity. Okay, give me a second to finish, and then we go to Karl Marx. Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital, main communist book in 1860, when we were dealing with those horrible factories at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where who worked? Who probably shouldn't have worked? Children, right? In this country, all the way up to 1900, we had 1 million kids. And by the way, 1 million back in 1900. Imagine what our population was then, right? A lot smaller. So 1 million was a bigger number, if that makes sense, right? A bigger percentage. So children were working up until they were 14, and they're working factory jobs that were really, really dangerous. And a lot of people were working in factory towns where you got paid in factory money, and you'd have to live in factory housing, and you have to go to a factory store. And you know what happened at the end of the week? Well, you owed more money than you actually made. And so capitalism at that time was really winner take all, and everyone else just scraped by in really bad conditions. And so understand that his critique came from a time where capitalism had not evolved to the way it has in the United States, where at least we have a middle class and we have those kinds of opportunities. Those weren't around. So that's the preamble to his thought process. So, so Karl Marx, he was in the late 1800s, and here's his critique on capitalism. Now, I want you not to become communists or Marxists, but I want you to understand his thinking and his critique, because there's still some truth here. Now, the solution was that we all don't work for private businesses, we all work for the government. And that we don't work for ourselves, we work for everyone else. Let me start with this, actually. This is not that good. Right now, we got to struggle in society to get by, right? You got to go to college to earn a decent degree. You got to pay for your housing. You got to pay for your health care. You got to pay for your education at some point. So you got to scramble and scrape and look out for yourself, right? If that's the case, if you need all those things and they cost money, you got to scramble and scrape. And you got to maybe just look out for yourself rather than other people. But what if, and so this is what people on the far left say. And I used to be really critical of this, and then some students said, wait, think this through. Maybe they're right. So this one guy, Noam Chomsky, who's known as very far to the left, said, what if we gave everyone in our country healthcare, housing, and made sure they had enough to eat and good education? Would that change us to work hard, not just for ourselves, but work hard for society at large? I'm not just going to work to pay my bills. I'm going to work to make things to help society because I got everything I need. What do you think? No? Yes? Maybe?
I think it won't work because we, like, right now, we all work for ourselves, so that's switch because it's gonna change for ourselves to everything else. But if like we started with that, I can see if that's one thing we knew, I can see it.
Over time, maybe changing. But yeah, and I don't know if I believe it or not. I was first like, no way, that's too much of a change. But I can see, especially when I hear students go, no, I could see how that could work. I could see maybe. So that's one way of thinking how communism could work, is if we all have our basic needs met, then why do we work hard? For other people. Now, I don't know if that's the case. Now, one other thing, because I think we're selfish. I think just inherently, we are selfish beings, right? So it's not built in to be generous. But that's his point. Also, the idea of Marxism is this: we've never had a truly communist country. Never had a truly communist China, no. Soviet Union, no. North Korea, no. None of them have been communist. Why? You have any idea? No, that's part of it. But in the evolution of how communism comes about is by first us getting to the point of hyper-capitalism. We get to the point where most people are pretty well off, where we all have our vacation home, our second car, and a boat, and we realize I'm still not happy. Right? More and more stuff hasn't made me happy. And so we realize, wait, what makes me happy? What gives me joy? Loving relationships with other people. And then we have another change. We have this change where we realize more stuff doesn't bring me happiness. Having my neighbors happy and my family happy and having community makes me happy. And then that will change. our selfishness to selflessness. Do you buy that?
Yeah.
Right? Get the theory, right? You don't have to buy it hook, line, and sinker, but that's the idea, right? First, you get your basic needs met, and then you work not for just yourself, you work for others. And then also, you've come through capitalism. China, Russia, North Korea, none of them came through capitalism. They went right from feudalism, which is essentially having lords and serfs, where it was essentially a few very rich people who had their own bound labor, slave-like system. And they went right from that to communism. And Karl Marx always said, no, you need to go through capitalism, be selfish, see that getting things doesn't make you happy, for you then to realize, no, what's going to make me happy is have a society where everyone's well. Have a society where I don't have to come to work and drive by a guy who's just on the road right there on Skyway. Did you see him coming into class? Who was passed out on, no doubt, drugs, where I just pass by him and I don't do anything. How about you? But that leaves a little hurt in my heart. Like, I live in a society where, what am I going to do? I don't even know what I do for him. But I want to now live in a society where I've got enough stuff where everyone's helped out in a certain way. You don't have to buy this. This is just the logic behind their thinking. So capitalism at this point in time created wealth, but only to a very, I should say, very, very few, and left most people in poverty. So capitalism wasn't working for most people. This is pre-middle class, pre even the promise of middle class. So if you would do this in your notes, leave some space between our different classes. Is bougie still a word that's used? Okay. Yeah, what does bougie mean? Rich. It comes from bourgeoisie, the French, from the idea of a middle class, the bourgeoisie. I mean, it's French, but it's laissez-faire would be the opposite of this. Laissez-faire would be don't interfere with markets. Let it be. We'll learn more about that word a few later. The capitalists own the means of production. They own the factories and they own the physical capital. What is that physical capital? What is K? LLK. What is K? So capital is financial capital, money, and then there's economic capital, physical capital, which is K in our symbols. What is that? I'm pointing to capital in this room.
Oh, technology.
Technology, tools, equipment. So the capitalists own that. They own the factories with all the tools and equipment and tech that make things. Remember, we're talking about a time where everybody was equally poor, except the very few that owned the means of production. And so the low-skilled worker. Here's the quick, I'm going to give a quick story and I'm going to end early to help you give you some time to put together your binders. Middle managers. I mean, I grew up relatively poor and I wanted to be middle class. Coming here, you're a sellout. Bourgeoisie is some of the worst. The capitalists are bad, but to a communist, the bourgeoisie is the worst. Why? They used to be the proletariat, and now they're the managers for the capitalists. They're exploiting the worker to get more income for the capitalists. So they sell their labor. So now do an arrow right here. They sell their labor at a fraction of the money they make their boss. Is that true? Do you get paid less than the money your boss is making off of you? true for all of us, right? The way capitalism works. To a communist, your boss paying you less than the money your boss is making off of your work is inherently wrong. Is it? Right, that's a good point. It's all you know, right? They would call us accepting that false consciousness. That somehow capitalism has brainwashed us to think it's okay for someone to make money off of your labor. To them, that surplus labor belongs to you, the worker, and that's a form of theft. So agree or disagree, this is just what his thoughts were. And the proletariat, or the bourgeoisie, used to be proletariat, but they worked their way up to being managers, and now they exploit them to give the money to the people at the top. Karl Marx was struggling. I don't know. I don't believe he was. But he did have enough money where he could write. So maybe that is rich in his day, actually. So a study was done by the guy I thought was going to win the Nobel Prize this year in economics, where he looked at 400 years of data. What grows more if you have investment money or wages? And he found over the last 400 years, if you have investment money, that's going to grow faster than if you just have your own labor. And so what does that mean over time? That over time, the rich get richer. More and more of the resources go to those with money. And the average worker, and so get this, I hate the saying the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. That's not true in our country. The rich get richer, everyone else just does a little bit better every year. It doesn't have the same ring to it, right? But people do just do a little bit better while most of the wealth gets accumulated up here. And so then capitalists amass amounts of financial capital and they're able to wield greater political and economic control. You see some truth to this critique of our system? And especially even if you're totally against this, I just want you to, or his solutions, which is we all work for the government, which I think is not a very useful solution because we are selfish. We don't work for other people, we work for ourselves. This might be a good reflection of what takes place in our society, although we do have a strong middle class, although it's struggle. Talk to each other for a second. Who are the modern day capitalists? Who are the modern day proletariat? Who are the modern day bourgeoisie? Who are them?
That's why I'm here.
And where do you want, where are you now and where do you want to be?
During bodies. We already are up there.
Is this okay with you? This will tell you whether you're a modern day communist or not. Is this okay? Is it okay that businesses pay you less money than what you make for the business? If you say that's fine, you're not a Marxist. But if you believe that, wait, there's an inherent injustice there, then you might be a Marxist.
Well, don't business take more risk than an individual employee?
You're a capitalist. I can hear it right there. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the capitalist argument. Absolutely. But so follow this now. Follow the critique. Even if you're not a Marxist, just follow this critique of our system. So that being the case, that you don't make all the money because the business owner is taking all the risk. you then have the once proletariat, people who used to be the worker bees, become middle managers. And now they're, it has to be said, I think we could maybe agree that you are exploiting, maybe not in the bad sense of the word, but in the constructive sense of the word, your employees, right? You're exploiting their time to make a little bit of money off of them, right? Not like exploitation in a horrible sense, just like I'm being exploited right now for my skills at my level of pay, although I ain't complaining. So note here, they're being exploited to get more money out of them than they're really giving the owner, and then it accumulates with the capitalists. And over time, what we've seen in this country is that more and more of the wealth and more of the nation's income is heading up here. There's nothing wrong, and in fact, it's perfectly appropriate to have a capitalist system where there are rich people and poor people to motivate people to get more education, to work harder, to work smarter. But the reality isn't that we have that income inequality is inherently bad. It's that income inequality is getting worse. And so for me, that's maybe a moral argument, and then you decide whether it's a moral argument for you that the bottom 2/3 aren't getting as much as keeps accruing, keeps piling up for those at the top. I think morally, maybe that's a problem. You don't have to agree with that. But what I think is a problem politically is if we want a democracy only works if you feel the system's working for you. And if 2/3 of the people are feeling like the system isn't working for them, how can you have a democracy? And I kind of like our country. I signed up to serve overseas. This country means a lot. Our values mean a lot to me. And having a democratic government, by the way, I think I told you about the Nobel Prize in relation to the 3 theories of economic development. There they showed in all of their data that where you see good, vibrant democracies, you see more economic growth because the democracy is taking care of people's rights and their ability to feel dignity about themselves, like outlawing racism or sexism, or at least making it hard to be that way. Those people who once were felt to not have dignity and be discriminated against are going to feel more included, are going to be more inventive, and then are going to create things that help economic growth for everybody. So democracy both is being hurt by this, by the massive power here, because people feel like the system isn't working for them. And if we move away from democracy, then that's going to hurt us economically. If you follow my logic there, right? So there's a moral question, you agree or disagree, but there is just this factual basis that democracies require a middle class. If our middle class doesn't feel like it's being served, then maybe we go to a system where capitalists are in charge, and then the entire economic system doesn't have the same benefits for everybody. Now, thank you. So now add this. Okay, so now a counter argument. Counter argument to this all being bad is that the bourgeoisie are the people who invent new things, who create new industries. And the bourgeoisie sometimes create new industries that unseat the reigning capitalists. So first with the full Marxism, and now with critiques of Marxism. What's created our great economic growth? The bourgeoisie. The Marxists are sellouts who are just exploiting the proletariat or the capitalist.
This is like Mary Antoinette.
That's French spelling. I have to look it up every time. You get this point? The middle managers, the people who've worked their way up from being the proletariat and the average worker, they're starting new businesses, right? These are small business owners. And when you start something new, you're hopefully inventing something new. And when you're inventing something new, what are you doing? You're creating more jobs. And when you're creating more jobs and inventing something new, you know what you might do? You might put one of them out of business and become one of them. Anybody who's proletariat who wants to get bourgeoisie and then be a capitalist? Just me? I mean, okay, so a few of us, right? So you might not necessarily be Marxist, but understand this critique here of the system. Because certainly we're getting more and more income inequality and wealth inequality, and that seems to be leading to bad outcomes. So the Marxist critique has some value, but it also has holes in it, of course. I would also say this. that when we have a system that's just built for advertising and consumers to buy things, that we're wasting resources on advertising and product choice. And I don't know, this came to me the other day when I saw Gatorade water being sold. You get my point? Do we need Gatorade water?
Actually, we do, yeah.
Why not
Gatorade
the
is
Sonic or
Ew.
the tap
No,
or?
like, we don't need this, Connie, we don't need Aquafina, we need Gatorade water.
Why do we, Joey, why do we need Gatorade water? I need more than that.
It's for the electric lights. Whatever.
Does it have electrolytes in it? Yeah, okay. Does regular water not have electrolytes?
Sugar water.
Sugar water does? No.
Sugar water. Good for you. It's nicotine.
Right. So here's my bigger point.
Oh, isn't it?
How many car brands do we have? And car models do we have?
Oh.
How many clothing brands do we have? And how many clothing brands do we have?
More than car brands.
More than car brands. How many drinks do we have? Sodas? How many waters do we have available to us? Right? Dasani, help me out, Jonas, you seem to be right on that.
Refresher, Dasani, Ichi, Smart Water, Arrowhead, Crystal Geyser.
So what capitalism does, and if you were in my micro class, you might remember a little bit of this. What capitalism does is it gives us all of this great choice. I can have 5 different types of H2O, a natural element, right? And what does society need to do to have those different choices? We need to pay for advertising. We need to pay for product development. How many water choices does a human really need to survive? 1. Now, in the Soviet Union, they had a car called the Lada, and that was their only car. You know the Lada? A buddy of mine went there before the Berlin Wall collapsed and communism collapsed there. And he was on a tour of St. Petersburg in Soviet Union, now Russia. And the tour guide pointed out, and look, you'll see the Ladas here. It's the most popular brand of car in the Soviet Union. It's also the only car in the Soviet Union. But think about something. In that communist society, they said, okay, cars, let's make a solution. Boom, car. We've made the one car. You have no choice. Society could use its other resources to do what? Instead of building many different types of cars, make sure everyone's housed. Make sure everyone has medical care. But in this country, we want 10 different types of sedans, 20 different types of trucks, because we want choice rather than just one thing to get it done and then use those funds to take care of other things. That makes some sense. You don't have to agree with it, but what does it make? Do you get the reasoning?
I understand, but like, still they had long lines at the food line because it's all, one thing, everything can get at one place.
Right. Well, that's the inefficiency of communism, that you don't have an incentive to work hard, so people aren't making enough bread. So that
You're making the same as the guy that's.
Right. But separate issue. But you get that it is, in a sense, wasteful if you have people without healthcare homes, but we have 10 different types of TV. I mean, just think of the variety that we have. Why not one type of TV, one type of car, one type of water, one type of soda? And then we can take the trillions we spend on advertising and product development and solve all the problems we have.
Americans like to show off.
Because Americans like to show off. Now,
More innovation either.
yeah, okay, very good point. When it's like that, there's no incentive for innovation, and we wouldn't have that. Very good critique of that system. Now let me go one other. So I'm just doing this Marxist thing. Just play along with me. Because we live in a capitalist society where we can only get by based on working, and work tends to be, I don't know, does anybody feel their true authentic self at work? What do you do, Ricky?
I'm glad we're gonna have this conversation after class because I've been gone for a week. I got my job as an Amazon driver again.
Wait. But does that fulfill everything about you as a human being when you're
Yes.
driving?
Yes. I did track since I was 9 years old, and that's all I do every day to get paid as run. So yeah, it makes me feel good. Mentally and physically makes me feel good.
I love a person who loves their job. That's fantastic.
Not a lot of Americans love their job.
No. And so this is my point. What about the rest of you? Your jobs? Does it feel like it is fully you coming out when you're at work? What do you do?
I work on the restaurant.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. Tiffany, what do you do?
I work with adults with special needs.
Yeah, it's really enriching. I'll give you that. And I think teachers, we tend to feel, I mean, what am I doing? I'm being myself in front of you. How could this not be my true self? Unless I was bullshitting, which I just do a little bit. So, but okay, follow along, come back with me. Do you see that a lot of jobs and a lot of Americans feel their jobs just don't have any real meaning? They go to work to make money because they have to, and then they go home. And that work just didn't fulfill them, right? It was just a step to get money to do other things.
Survive.
Just survive. Okay, so now get the Marxist critique on that. Because capitalism makes us work at jobs where we can't feel like our true selves, we lose a sense of who we are as our true selves. And so where do we find ourselves? In our stuff. In my Cadillac. With my Dasani water. Oh, and I really like this. When people go into Starbucks and they read off their order, I wrote sorry for people, or Dutch Brothers, and is that the same thing you get every time?
Yeah.
And okay, but do you see when people order their order, it's almost this trend to all have my double macchiato latte with lemon and a little bit of nutmeg. And there's almost like this, I don't know, what would I say?
Entitlement.
No, not entitlement. Like they're fully feeling themselves. Like this drink is me. They're expressing themselves in their drink choice. Do you? Yeah, that would be a Marxist critique of capitalism because they're rushing off to work and that work doesn't fulfill them. So where are they going to find their fulfillment? In their drink or in their car model. And so a Marxist would say, because we're drained of being able to be our true selves in a capitalist system, we find ourselves in our sports team. We become way too associated with the Raiders or the 49ers, of which I'm guilty too, right? Because we're slaves to just getting enough money. Now, next exercise. You're not going to see this in yourself unless you're really self-examining. Do you see this in others who are way too attached to a band, a singer, a sports team, a car, some kind of thing where Disneyland is one of them too, where that thing somehow is them, but of course it's not, it's a thing. You see that in others? There's the major critique of capitalism, that we waste all of those resources on choice. Why? Because we can't be our true selves in capitalism, so we find ourselves in that choice.
True self in the Marxist way either though, because you're all the same.
Yeah, but okay, so here's where I'm going to give you the answer, but it doesn't quite fit for me either. The answer is that in a Marxist system, everyone gets what they need, and therefore I feel fulfilled.
There's no individuals.
So what are we under Marxism? Are we individualist or are we collective?
Collective.
Yeah, we're more collective, and we get our joy from others being happy, not just ourselves. Is that who humans are?
Nope.
I don't think it is who we are now. I agree. But remember what I had offered to you last class. What if everybody had their housing, their food, their healthcare taken care of? Would we be more like that? And that's an open question. Right? Some people feel like maybe that would awaken something in everybody. If everyone had their basic needs met, maybe I would get my happiness from making sure everyone else was well.
Still find ways to exploit it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to make us go run to the barricades and overthrow the system, just trying to give us an idea of here's their belief system, find the truth where you can. But of course, there are holes in it because it's never worked, because we tend to be selfish. And what does capitalism harness? Our selfishness, right? I'm going to do something that's going to benefit me, and that works. Communism didn't work. Why? Because it relied on people working hard for other people and not themselves, and that seems to be who we are. Fortunately or unfortunately. What's my last thing here? The European model of capitalism, as you can see from that data as we just saw, I'll go back to it. So many of these European countries, especially in the Scandinavian countries, there's a lot more of providing healthcare to citizens. There is more welfare spending, but there's a little misnomer here. Most people believe that European countries are just giving all their money away if you're on welfare. They're changing now to make the system that benefits two sides. So if you're poor, and then I'm not, and I need a house cleaner, I do. They identify poor people who need work, and the way they do their welfare program is I only have to pay half their salary to come clean my house. So rather than just giving out money for no work, find poor people with some skills or some free time and have the government pay half their salary to help other people. And that way you're helping the poor, but the poor are also helping themselves and helping others in the community. So that's another way of looking at how to handle capitalism.